Welcome back to Study Hall, where we take all that complex stuff and try to make it make sense.
Trying to unpack it a little bit.
That's right.
Yeah.
Someone's been busy. It looks like you've sent over some serious legal documents this time.
Well, we're going into the heart of American democracy today. I think looking at a bill that could really change how we think about presidential power.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Senate Bill 4973. They're calling it the No Kings Act.
Catchy title.
Is catchy.
Yeah. So this bill comes at an interesting time, right? We've seen these court battles over presidential immunity, and it seems like this is Congress's way of saying, hey, wait a minute, we get to have a say in this too.
So Congress is jumping in the ring here. This bill was introduced August 1st, 2024 by a group of Democrats led by Senator Schumer.
Right.
It's not just an idea either. It was read a second time and placed on the calendar September 9th, 2024. So it's an active bill.
So it's moving along through the process. It's not just sitting there gathering dust. And the timing is so interesting, especially after, we saw the United States v. Trump case.
United States v. Trump was a wild ride.
It was a roller coaster.
The district court denied presidential immunity.
Right.
And then the Court of Appeals was like, yeah, we agree with that.
Uh-huh.
But then it went up to the Supreme Court.
To the top.
And they vacated the lower court's rulings.
Yeah.
And basically said, hold on a minute, there is presidential immunity.
They threw a wrench in things.
It's like a big rewind.
Rewind back to the beginning.
So now we've got this bill saying no kings. Like nobody's above the law, but the Supreme Court is saying, well, maybe the president's a little bit above the law.
Right, maybe just a little bit.
So there's tension here.
Big time tension. That's what we're talking about today, trying to unpack this.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Before we can get into the weeds of the bill, just the title, No Kings Act. Like, what does that make you think of? I think of, no kings. It's like the president isn't a monarch.
Right.
Ruling by decree immune to the laws.
Not a king.
Just makes me think of, those pictures of kings and queens with like a big red X over them.
I love that image. Yeah, that's a great image. And it really does sum up what this bill is trying to do. Dismantle that idea that the executive has this inherent privilege or immunity, that they're somehow above the law.
It's not just symbolic, though, right? Like this bill really gets into the specifics of how it wants to achieve these goals.
Oh, yeah. They have very specific arguments and mechanisms that they lay out.
So how do they start? Where's the foundation of their argument?
Well, they lay it all out right at the beginning in the findings section. It's like the preamble to the bill, and they're not mincing words. They say flat out, no one is above the law, not even the president of the United States.
There's no beating around the bush.
Straight to the point. And it seems like they're trying to head off any argument that says, oh, there's this inherent presidential power, this inherent immunity. No, they're saying, no, this is how America works. We have equal justice under the law. It applies to everyone, no matter what your title is, what position you hold.
So they're setting the stage with this strong statement about the rule of law. But they don't just stop there.
Right. No, they don't.
They bring in some big historical hitters.
They go back to the Founding Fathers, specifically Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 69. And, that he's comparing the American president to the King of England.
Oh, they bring out Hamilton.
Yeah, gotta have Hamilton in there.
So what does he have to say?
Well, Hamilton's making this point that, in England, the king is above the law. She can do no wrong. And he's drawing this contrast to the president of the United States, who is accountable if they violate the law.
So they're basically saying, like, hey, we're not England. We had a whole revolution to get rid of kings, and the president's not, chosen by God or something like that. They're a public servant, and they're subject to the same laws as everybody else.
Exactly. That's the point they're making. They're drawing a direct line from the Founding Fathers to this debate today, saying this is a core principle of America, presidential accountability. It's woven into the fabric of the country.
It's a pretty powerful argument to use the Founding Fathers.
Yeah.
But this isn't just some theoretical, historical debate, right?
No, it's not.
This is a response to what's happening, with these court cases.
And these court cases are really important for understanding why this bill is even happening, right? Remember, the Supreme Court opened the door for presidential immunity a little bit with their decision in United States v. Trump. And this bill is Congress saying, whoa, 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 hold on. We want to shut that door.
So it's a direct response to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
A little bit of a power struggle.
Maybe a little bit.
I want to bring it back to our listeners for a second.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this idea that a president might be immune from criminal charges? Does that seem right to you?
It's a good question, and I think it's a question that every American should be asking themselves because this is about fairness. It's about accountability, and it's about what kind of democracy we want to have.
It gets to the heart of, are we all equal under the law?
Right, and that's why this bill is so important, because it forces us to think about that. Are we going to be a country where even the most powerful person is held accountable? Or are we going to go back to the days of kings and queens where some people are just above the law?
Yeah, it's a tough one. But that's what we're here for, to unpack these things.
That's what we do here at Study Hall, try and figure it out.
So we've talked about, the big ideas behind this No Kings Act, the court cases, the history.
Yeah, setting the stage.
What does it actually want to do today? How would it limit presidential immunity?
Well, it gets into the specifics. Section 3, it's even titled, in all caps, No Presidential Immunity for Crimes, and it says that basically no president, former president, vice president, nobody has any kind of immunity from prosecution for breaking federal criminal law.
So no immunity whatsoever. Are there any exceptions?
Well, there is one big exception.
Okay.
It says that immunity only applies if Congress specifically says so.
Oh, so Congress gets to decide.
Yeah, they're flipping the script on this whole immunity thing. Instead of saying there's this inherent immunity, they're saying, no, you have no immunity unless we say so.
So it's not a total ban, but it really shifts the power.
It does.
To Congress.
Congress.
Yeah.
And it gets even more interesting when you think about future legal cases. We talked about how the Supreme Court sometimes looks at whether what the president did was part of their official duties. This bill says the courts can't even think about that unless Congress tells them to.
So they're tying the court's hands a little bit.
Yeah.
Saying, stick to what WE say.
Right.
But couldn't Congress abuse this power?
That's a good question, and it's one of the reasons why this is such a controversial bill. It raises questions about the balance of power. Could they use this to protect their friends and go after their enemies? It's something to think about.
It's a slippery slope.
It is, and it reminds us that even when you're trying to do good things, changing the legal system always has unintended consequences. That's why it's important to have these conversations, think critically about what could happen if this bill becomes law. What are the good things? What are the maybe not so good things?
Yeah, we can't just accept a law without, thinking about it.
Right.
Even if it has a cool name.
Exactly.
Like the No Kings Act.
Yeah.
So let's say this does become law.
Yeah.
How would it actually work? Can you walk us through it?
Well, think about this. Imagine a future president and they're accused of some crime while in office.
Okay.
Maybe it's financial fraud or abuse of power or even something like obstruction of justice under this law. It would be a lot harder for them to say, oh, I'm immune because I'm the president.
No more hiding behind the resolute desk.
Right. They'd have to go through the same legal process as anyone else. They might have to face a grand jury. They could be indicted. They could go on trial, and they could even be convicted.
It's kind of a powerful image to think of, the president of the United States standing in a courtroom just like anyone else accused of a crime.
It really drives home that idea of accountability, equal justice under the law, that no one is above the law, not even the president.
But some people might say that this weakens the presidency. If the president's always worried about being prosecuted, they might not be able to do their job.
That's a fair point, and it's something that Congress needs to think about as they debate this bill. You have to balance accountability with letting the president do their job.
Right. We don't want a president who's afraid to make decisions.
Yeah, we need them to be able to act in the best interests of the country.
Okay, let's talk about something else that caught my eye in this bill. The whole judicial review thing.
Ah, yes, judicial review. That's where it gets really interesting.
Because it seems like it's limiting the power of the courts, right?
It is specifically the Supreme Court's power to step in when it comes to presidential immunity.
And that's a big deal because judicial review is a cornerstone of our government, right? It's the idea that the courts can look at what the other branches are doing and make sure it's constitutional.
Right. It's like the ultimate check on power. No one is above the law, not even Congress, not even the president.
But this bill's like, wait, hold on. There are some exceptions to that rule.
Right.
When it comes to criminal charges against the president, they're trying to limit what the Supreme Court can do.
They're saying, well, maybe not in this case.
Why? What's the reasoning there?
Well, they argue that these kinds of cases are really political and that getting the courts involved could just make things worse.
So they're saying the courts should stay out of politics. But isn't that a slippery slope? How do you decide what's a legal issue and what's a political issue?
That's the age-old question. There's no easy answer. But what they're saying is that when you're dealing with the president, the stakes are so high and the potential for bias is so strong that it's better to let the political process handle it.
So they think impeachment is more of a political thing than a legal thing.
Exactly. And they're worried that if the Supreme Court gets involved, it could undermine that process and just create more division and chaos.
I see their point. But what if the president's really abusing their power?
Mm-hmm.
What if they're using the political process to get away with crimes? Shouldn't the courts be able to step in?
It's a tough question, and it really shows you the tension at the heart of this bill. We want to protect the president from being harassed, but we also want to make sure they can't just break the law and get away with it.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you balance protecting the president with making sure they're accountable?
Okay, so how does the bill actually try to limit judicial review? What are the specifics?
Well, it sets up a really specific process for how people can challenge the law itself, and it's not easy.
Real.
First of all, not just anyone can challenge it. It says only a former president, the vice president, or a former vice president can sue over it.
So if I'm just a regular person and I think this law is unconstitutional, I can't do anything.
Nope. According to this bill, you'd have to convince the president or the vice president to fight for you.
Interesting.
And if one of them does decide to challenge it, there's a really tight deadline. If they want to challenge the whole law, they've got 180 days. But if it's just about how the law is being applied in a specific case, it's only 90 days.
So you got to be quick.
Yeah, and it's not enough to just say, hey, we think this might be unconstitutional. They have to prove it with clear and convincing evidence. That's a really high bar in legal terms.
So they're making it tough to challenge this thing.
They are, but what happens if someone does manage to jump through all those hoops?
Yeah, where's the case go?
Well, the bill says any challenges go straight to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. And get this, their decision is basically final. You can appeal to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, but that's it. No Supreme Court.
Wait, no Supreme Court at all?
Nope. The bill is very clear. The Supreme Court has no power to overturn this law or to stop it from being enforced.
Wow. They really thought of everything, didn't they? But can they really control how this will play out in the real world?
That's the big question. The bill's trying to cover all its bases. But once a law is passed, things can get unpredictable. There are court battles, different interpretations, unintended consequences. It's all part of the game.
It's not just a theoretical thing either. This could have a real impact on what happens, if a president is accused of a crime.
Oh, yeah. Think about how it could affect elections, public trust, even how other countries see America.
This could be huge.
It could. If a sitting president could be indicted, it would change everything.
And speaking of changing things, let's bring it back to our listeners for a minute.
Okay.
What does all this mean for you, the average person who cares about the law?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? This bill is asking some fundamental questions about the rule of law, about accountability, about power in America.
So no matter what you think about this bill, it's a conversation we need to have.
Exactly. And it's not just about this one bill. This is part of a much bigger trend. We're seeing more and more debates about presidential power, executive privilege, the balance of power between the different branches of government. It's a really interesting time to be following American law.
And as citizens, we can't just sit back and watch this unfold, right?
No, we need to be part of it. We need to ask questions. We need to understand how these legal battles are shaping our lives.
Okay, back to the bill.
Yeah.
We've talked about the what and the why. What about the how? What's actually in the bill?
Well, it gets pretty specific about what you can and can't do.
Sure.
It's almost like a rule book for how to deal with criminal accusations against a president.
Sounds complicated.
It's definitely not light reading, but there are some parts that are really interesting. Like, remember how we talked about the limits on the Supreme Court? Well, the bill actually lists out point by point the things they can't do. Yeah, for example, they can't just dismiss an indictment because they think the crime falls under the president's authority, and they can't just say, oh, the president's not guilty, or stop the trial for the same reason.
No more get-out-of-jail-free card just because you're the president.
Right. They're trying to stop the Supreme Court from saying, oh, well, this is all part of the president's job, so we're just going to drop the case.
It seems like they're also trying to say that the president can't just say they're too busy to deal with legal stuff.
Yeah, the bill says that the Supreme Court can't even pause or disband a grand jury investigation into the president, even if it's distracting them from their duties.
No excuses.
Exactly. The law applies to everyone.
And they're really specific about everything, right?
Oh, yeah. They talk about where these cases have to be filed, what kind of evidence you can use, how appeals work. It's like they're trying to build this whole new system for dealing with these situations because they're so unprecedented.
So it's not just about making a point, it's about setting up a whole new process.
It is. They want to make sure everything's fair, transparent, and accountable. Those values should apply to everyone, no matter how powerful they are.
I'm impressed with how much detail they put into this bill.
They definitely did their homework. They know this bill could really change things, and they're making sure it's airtight.
And like we said, the consequences could be huge.
Yeah.
This could change how we see the presidency, how we think about the balance of power, what we expect from our leaders.
And that's why it's so important for all of us to be involved in this conversation, to understand what's at stake, and to make our voices heard.
Okay, but let's get back to the bill itself for a second.
Okay.
We've talked about the goals, the safeguards, but how do they actually imagine this bill being enforced?
Well, that's where things get a little bit tricky. There are some parts that are open to interpretation. For example, they want to limit presidential immunity, but they don't actually say what counts as a crime that would be exempt from immunity.
So there's still room for debate about what exactly falls under this law.
Oh, yeah. And remember, even though they're trying to limit what the Supreme Court can do, the courts will still have a big role in interpreting this law and deciding how it applies in different situations. They could even end up shaping how the law changes over time.
So even with this really detailed bill, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and the courts will probably have the final say.
Exactly. The law is always changing and evolving, and this bill is just one step in that process.
Yeah, it's wild to think about how this one bill, the No Kings Act, could set off a domino effect and change everything from court decisions to political strategies, even to like how future presidents do their job.
Yeah, who knows what will happen.
It makes you wonder, did the people who wrote this bill realize just how much impact it could have?
Hard to say what they were thinking, but one thing that really stands out to me is how they connect their arguments to, these bigger ideas about American history and values.
It's not just about the law. It's about what America stands for.
Yeah, they're not just focusing on the technical stuff. They're trying to tap into something deeper.
Right. They're going back to those ideas of fairness and equality that, are supposed to be at the heart of America.
Right.
And they're not afraid to use some big names to make their point.
Yeah, like who do they bring up? Alexander Hamilton.
Of course they bring up Hamilton.
Federalist number 69, he argues that the president isn't supposed to be a king. He's not above the law. He's accountable to the people.
Hamilton, always a good choice.
Right.
But it's not just name dropping, right?
Yeah.
They're using Hamilton to make a specific point about what presidential power really means.
Exactly. In Federalist 69, Hamilton's drawing this contrast between the American president and the monarchs of Europe. He's saying that the president isn't chosen by God or anything like that. He's a public servant. The people gave him power, so he's answerable to them.
So they're basically saying the founders never wanted a president who could just do whatever he wanted.
That's the argument. They're tying this modern legal fight to this, older story about the meaning of American democracy.
That's a smart way to frame it.
It is.
It's not just a legal debate. It's about this, long-running struggle to figure out how much power the president should have and how we make sure they're accountable.
Right. It's a big question.
So the No Kings Act is just, one piece of this bigger puzzle about how American democracy works, this ongoing effort to find that sweet spot between a strong executive and the rule of law.
Exactly. And that brings us back to our listeners. The future of democracy really depends on people being informed and engaged and understanding these complicated issues.
We can't just leave it to the experts.
No, we all have a part to play.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The bill's goals, its mechanisms, the possible consequences, the history.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
What are the big takeaways? What do you want our listeners to remember about the No Kings Act?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the rule of law applies to everyone, even the most powerful people in the country.
No one gets a free pass.
Right. Even the president of the United States is not above the law. That's what this bill is all about.
No special treatment. Everyone's equal under the law. That's a big idea. And this bill is trying to make sure we don't forget it.
It is.
I think this bill also shows us how important checks and balances are in our government.
Yeah, it's a good reminder.
Congress is reminding us that they have a role to play in keeping an eye on the president and making sure they don't abuse their power.
It's all about making sure that no one person or branch of government has too much power.
Right. It's a system where everyone shares power. Yeah. Everyone keeps each other in check.
Exactly.
And finally, I think this bill is a reminder that we all have a responsibility to think about the kind of government we want and how we hold our leaders accountable.
We can't just assume everything will be okay. We need to be involved. We need to ask questions. We need to make our voices heard.
Right. It's up to all of us to make sure our democracy stays healthy.
Exactly.
So that's it for our deep dive into the No Kings Act. We've talked about it from all angles, and hopefully you've learned a thing or two and maybe even started thinking about these issues in a new way.
Hopefully we've given you something to think about.
And remember, this is just the beginning. this bill is still moving through Congress, so who knows what's going to happen next.
Yeah, keep an eye on this one. It could really change things.
Stay tuned, folks. This is a big deal.
It is.
In the meantime, go read the whole bill for yourself. Follow what's happening with it and talk about it with your friends and family.
Yeah, get involved.
Because at the end of the day, our democracy depends on all of us being informed and engaged.
That's what it all comes down to.
And that's what Study Hall is all about, giving you the tools to, really understand these complex issues, to think critically and to make a difference.
We want to help you make sense of the world.
So keep sending us your questions, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive into something interesting and important.
Until next time.
And remember, knowledge is power.